Sometimes you need to be more precise with your English. And in this video, I'm going to teach you 100 ways to be more precise when you're speaking or writing in English. And one way involves something called hedging. Now, hedging is to avoid sounding too certain about something, either certain that something is absolutely true or not true at all. And we use something called hedging language to avoid this when we cannot be certain that we're 100% sure of something. Now, did you watch the World Cup last month? If you did, you will know that Spain were the best team in the World Cup because they won. What about this sentence though? Everyone in Spain watched the World Cup final. Can we say this? Not with complete certainty, so we need some hedging language, such as with these words. Virtually everyone in Spain watched the World Cup final. Almost everyone in Spain watched the World Cup final. Practically everyone, nearly everyone, effectively everyone in Spain watched the World Cup final. Why do we use these words? It's when we want to say that we are nearly sure, but not quite enough to say 100%. Surely, on the day that Spain were playing in the World Cup final of football, you would think every Spanish person was watching television. But maybe not. Maybe there were farmers farming. Maybe there were people at work and they couldn't watch it. So there was probably a small percent who could not watch it. So to be more precise here, we don't want to say everyone. That's too general. We'll use one of these words in front of it. Now, how about poor England? Well, you all know that England did not get to the World Cup final. They lost to Argentina in the last minute. And you might think this would be true. Nobody in England watched the World Cup final. Well, that wasn't completely true because there were some people who were very enthusiastic about football and watched the World Cup final anyway. So instead of saying nobody, we could say this: hardly anyone, barely anyone, scarcely anyone, practically no one, virtually nobody. And this is hedging to avoid saying absolutely no, when we think the answer is probably close to no, but a little bit more than no. Perhaps just a very little amount. Now, actually, I think millions of people in England did actually watch the World Cup final. So these examples may not be exactly right for this situation. It just tied in well with the idea of the World Cup. So I thought I'd use it. But you know what I mean. When you don't want to say nothing, but you want to say close to nothing, to be more precise, use this hedging language. Now, sometimes we need to be more precise in other ways, such as when we are talking about size. Now, look at this house. It's not very big, is it? So if I was describing this house, I would say it's a tiny house or a small house. But then you get bigger houses, which you could say are compact or more modest houses. They're still not very big, but they're bigger than a tiny house. Now, how about houses that are much bigger? Well, we'll use other words to be more precise about these. Substantial, large, enormous. And then we have the huge houses, perhaps looking like this. This is a really, really big house. So we have other words that we'll use to describe these, from enormous to immense, colossal and gargantuan houses. These are all words that help you be more precise about the size that you're describing. And it helps you increase your range of English. Rather than just saying big and small, here are 10 more words that describe those situations and all of those in between. Now back to hedging, because we also have hedging language for appearance. How things appear. Now let's go back to this statement here. Spain were the best team in the World Cup. You could say it's a factual statement because they won the World Cup final, but perhaps there's a possibility that they were not actually the best team. It's very, very likely they were the best team, but maybe they just did better on that particular day. Maybe France were actually a better team, but they just had a bad day when they played Spain. So let's hedge this a little bit and talk about it in another way. Talk about it in a way which was, to me, Spain were the best team in the World Cup, but that's just how it appeared to me. And I'm leaving space for another possibility. So we could use these words to help us achieve this. Spain seemed to be the best team in the World Cup. Spain appeared to be the best team in the World Cup. Tended to be. That tended is slightly different. Tended means usually, on most days, in most situations. Came across as. That's a weaker way of saying they looked like they were the best team in the World Cup. So all of these phrases indicate it's an appearance that I received, and I'm limiting my certainty to just how I perceived the event. Now, how about phrases that help us be more precise when we're talking about movement? It's fairly well known that a snail is one of the slowest creatures. So if we're describing the movement of a snail, we might say that a snail crawls or creeps or inches or trudges or staggers. All of these things represent a movement which is really slow. Now, what about if someone is walking? Now, if their speed is a little bit faster, you could say that they are going on a stroll, or they wandered somewhere, or they ambled somewhere. So there's movement here, but not in a particularly urgent sense. If you're talking about someone who's being more urgent and moving faster, you could say stride, or march, or jog. But what about for a really fast animal? Something like a cheetah. Well, a cheetah doesn't crawl, it doesn't stroll, it doesn't stride. It races, it sprints, it dashes, it hurtles. These verbs all describe very fast movement by a living creature. Now let's go back to hedging again, and this time hedging of certainty. How do you show more precision that you are certain that something is true? So let's imagine you watch the World Cup final, back to my Spain example again, and you think Spain deserved to win the World Cup, but you want to show absolute certainty about this. Well, you could add the following words. Spain definitely deserved to win the World Cup. Spain unquestionably deserved to win the World Cup. Undeniably, decidedly, absolutely deserved. All of these words are used to tell your listener or reader, look, I'm not just saying they deserve to, I'm saying that there's no doubt at all. And I'm putting my emphasis on that word to show that I'm being precise about that word. We also have words of frequency in English that help describe precision in terms of how much, how many, how often. Do you have a diary? Does it look like this? There's not much in it. Let's imagine that you keep a diary of events that happen every day. And let's say there's an event that happens perhaps once every year. You would say that it rarely happens because there's 364 days where it doesn't happen and then one day where it does. What about this diary though? It's a little bit fuller. There's more going on because the things are happening more regularly. So now it's not once a year, perhaps it's once a week. So you could say that you sometimes do this, or regularly do this, or it often happens. But now let's think of a diary that's really full. Perhaps things are happening every day, all the time. We could use these words to be more precise about the frequency, to reflect the fact that there's a high frequency, repeatedly, consistently, habitually, invariably. Now we looked before at hedging for certainty, now for hedging about possibility. And I'm sure you'll agree that that makes sense with this particular sentence. England would have beaten Spain in the final of the World Cup. How certain are you about this? Maybe some English people are, but probably not many people in the rest of the world. So we need to introduce hedging words of possibility, not certainty. England possibly would have beaten Spain in the final. England conceivably would have beaten Spain in the final. So possibly, well, this means there's a chance. Conceivably actually simply means there's a chance in your mind. You can think of it happening, but it's not really that likely. Potentially means that, again, there was a chance, but it was never going to happen. Theoretically and hypothetically, again, these are words that don't express a great possibility, just where this exists in your mind, where you're thinking of a situation where it happens. Maybe Spain get a red card and they have to play with fewer players than England. Maybe that's the way it would happen. So theoretically, hypothetically, perhaps England would have beaten Spain in the final, but probably not. Now, what about words that describe a quantity scale? Look at this picture. It shows a hurricane. It's blowing the trees right over. And at the end of the storm, no leaves remained on the trees. But what about in a gentler storm that doesn't blow so many leaves over? Well, maybe only few leaves remained on the trees. So it was a very strong storm and the leaves were very badly affected, but at the end of the storm, there was still a few. If you say few leaves were on the trees, you're being more negative than if you say a few leaves were on the trees. How many leaves on the trees? Oh, few leaves remained. How many leaves on the trees? Oh, there were a few leaves. You see how a few is more positive than few. And it's the same with little and a little. But these are for uncountable situations. So there was little rain. There was a little rain. Now, let's say that more leaves survived. Now you could say some leaves remained on the trees. And that means not few, not many. It's somewhere in between. This one is less precise, really. But we're trying to be clear. It's not at either end. We're not at the nothing end. We're not at the everything end. We're somewhere in the middle. Enough actually means the sufficient amount. There were enough leaves to provide shelter and shade for the people who sat underneath. Plenty of and most, well, plenty of is more than enough, and most is more than 50%. So if I say most of the leaves stayed on the trees, I mean between 50% and 100. In practice, we tend to use this when we're probably closer to the 100% mark. And then many is a large amount, like most, and all is 100%. Now let's look at some more words that bring precision to our speed. And now we're going to talk about describing modes of transport. So slow or sluggish describes something, transport that's moving slowly. So if you're walking, you are slow transport. You're sluggish transport. You're not moving quickly at all. If you're on a bike, then you're probably moving at a faster speed. Now, this could refer to both walking and cycling. You're moving at a leisurely speed, so it's not a particularly fast speed, but it's also not slow, or a steady speed. Once we say that you're traveling briskly or swiftly, then you're talking about someone who's much faster, like a car. And then all of these words could also refer to cars, but they refer to fast transport. So a train is rapid, it's speedy, it's fast. It moves rapidly across the country. And if you want to be really fast, like a plane, you move at breakneck speed. Now, breakneck means extremely fast as possible, almost unimaginably fast. So fast that it breaks your neck. I think that's where it comes from. Now, you could describe any of these modes of transport as going at breakneck speed if they are at the fastest they can possibly move. What about degree? How do we describe different degrees of things? Let's think about the rain here. Now, this cloud is not producing much rain, so we could say that it's producing barely any rain or hardly any rain or slightly Without the negative form, it is only slightly raining. Now, this cloud's producing a little more rain. So it's somewhat wet. It's reasonably wet on the ground. Now, this cloud looks the same, but let's just imagine that there's a higher intensity of rain out of this cloud. It's notably wet on the ground. There's lots of puddles there. It's very wet on the ground. And then when you've got really heavy rain, the degree increases again. It's extremely wet. It's remarkably wet. It's utterly wet. And here are the last 10 words to do with the quality of things. And I'm going to use a house to describe quality here. What do you think of the quality of this house? Not very good? So you could say this house is abysmal. It's atrocious. It's substandard. These words all describe very bad quality. Now, a normal house, you could say, is of adequate quality, passable quality, satisfactory quality. All of these words have probably a slightly more negative meaning to them, in that they mean that something is not necessarily brilliant, but it's enough. So you're not extremely happy, but it's okay. But what about this very shiny, brand new house? And it's got everything going for it, hasn't it? We could say this is an impressive house. It's a superb house. It's an impeccable house. It's an unparalleled house in its design. It's really, really good. So these are all words to do with quality, and use all of the words in this video, and you are going to help make your English more precise and more advanced, because you're able to show the difference between different levels using English language.